All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me for our South Central Texas Spring Climate Outlook webinar. For those of you who were here last year for this talk, you're going to notice some very common themes. Things will look pretty similar to the way they did last year. And the big reason for that, as many of you are keenly aware, is our double dip La Nina, which recently actually strengthened in the month of February. We'll get to that in just a second. So first off, we will talk just a little bit about this past winter, meteorological winter, of course, being the months of December, January, and February. We started out the winter with our warmest December on record. It wasn't even close for most locations, with records back into the late 1800s. For a few of the spots across the state that do have data back as late as 1889, that was also a very warm December year, but that was a long, long time ago. Despite colder than normal conditions in January and then especially in February, the season did finish across all of South Central Texas warmer than normal, which is pretty typical of La Nina winters, also true of the springs. Rainfall was below to well below normal. Really the only exception was right along and east of the Austin area, eastern Travis and Williamson, and then northern Bastrop and western Lee counties. Really the only areas that picked up above normal rainfall through the winter months. But on the whole, our long-term climate locations generally dry and generally warmer than usual. We'll also take a quick look back at some of the stats from last spring. Case studies can provide at least some insight, although they are technically anecdotal. Last spring, we were generally warmer and drier than normal through the month of March and in the first half of April as well. And then we kind of hit a switch and things got a lot wetter through the rest of the spring. Late April through about June 5th, we had several heavy rain events. Some locations during that time, especially in our coastal plains counties, picked up as much as 20 inches of rainfall, which is above normal, but not necessarily atypical for this part of the country. And of course, with the exception of Austin Bergstrom, whose ASOS sighting contributes to somewhat colder readings, especially overnight, it was above normal in terms of temperatures at our long-term climate sites. Coming back to this year, looking at rainfall deficits over the past 90 and 180 days, you can clearly see that over the last 3 months, been very dry for most of the west half of our area. Less than 25% of their usual rainfall over that time is that red shading. And even down here into Dimmitt and southern Maverick counties, some of those areas have seen less than a quarter inch of rain over the last several months. And even looking over a longer term, over the last 6 months, still very little rain in this southwestern region. And with the exception of locations along the I-35 corridor between Austin and San Antonio, and then eastward, and then a small area near the borders of Kinney and Maverick counties here, the rest of the area has been continued below normal over the course of the last 6 months. Climatologically speaking, we are entering our wet season as well as our severe weather season, and of course, our first significant chance for severe weather over portions of the area is upcoming here on Monday and Monday night. In terms of climatological severe weather reports, hail is our most common reported severe weather, but we do see an increase in thunderstorm wind damage reports through the spring months, peaking in May, as well as reports of flash flooding. Those sort of lag a little bit with the peak in the month of June. But right now, with as dry as we've been, we can take a little bit of rain, and we're hoping to get some of it on Monday. Of course, our average temperatures are on the upswing. They don't totally top out until we get towards the middle of July, but certainly feeling nicer, and we should, at least for most locations, be done with our freezes for the season. Can't completely rule out some hill country locations, dipping to freezing behind cold fronts for the next few weeks or so, but we're certainly, looking in the rearview mirror in terms of freezing temperatures here. In the near term, after Monday, things look to dry out a little bit in our area. For the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day outlooks, it looks like we'll be transitioning from a brief period of colder weather during the second half of next week to probably near normal temperatures as we round out the month of March. So like I hinted at the beginning, one of the primary drivers of our climate here in South Central Texas in the winter and the spring is the ENSO cycle. We are in our second straight year of La Nina conditions, and sea surface temperatures in the month of February actually did cool. And so we are still sort of in a moderate La Nina. This did increase the chances of holding on to that La Nina through the spring months and maybe even into the early summer before we finally transition back to our usual summer, neutral state. The chances of an El Nino developing next year have also reduced, although confidence in these outlooks as you get further and further to the right on this graph are much lower. Let's see here, sorry about that. Taking a look at historical temperature information at our long-term climate sites during La Nina years, we can see that for the most part they do end up warmer than normal in more than 2/3 of instances. I have not added 2021's data to this table, but it would also support that. The average temperature departure is typically around 1 to 1.5 degrees warmer than normal, and we'll see later on that some of our climate models think that that's probably a pretty good guess for our temperature anomaly over the 3-month period. That signal is strongest at San Antonio in the historical data, but we will be transitioning slowly through weak La Nina to neutral over the course of the next few months, somewhat similar to what happened last year. Our historical data this time spread out over the Climate Prediction Center's regions, which don't necessarily match up perfectly with our area, but have outlined sort of where we are here, do show a tendency towards an increased risk of warm extremes during March, April, and May here in South Central Texas. That signal clearly a little bit stronger for areas just to the north of our area of responsibility, but definitely still there over South Central Texas. Here's a look at one of our long-term climate models and what it thinks our April, May, and June temperature anomaly may be. And this is even stronger signal for warmer than normal conditions than what this model was showing at this time last year. Much of South Central Texas would be in line for a positive temperature anomaly of 1.8 to 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately, for the next full 3-month period starting April 1st. And our long-term model ensembles generally agree with the output of the CFS, both in terms of the magnitude of what we expect in terms of the warming, and in sort of the general geographic distribution, with the stronger signal just to the north of our area. There are also, and I did not show it here, some calibrated probabilities similar to the products that the Climate Prediction Center puts out, and it does have us at a very high confidence, 90% for April, May, June, that we will be warmer than normal. And this is about 20 to 30% higher than this model suggested were the probabilities at this time last year. So with this information, it does appear very likely that we will see a warmer than average spring, which may not necessarily be good news. Talk a little bit here about severe weather. In La Nina years, research has shown that parts of the southern plains, especially just to our north into northeast Texas, the Arklatex region, it does have an increased risk for especially hailstorms, but also for tornadoes. The correlation is a little bit weaker for tornadoes, but we saw this last year, for those that like anecdotal evidence, and I'll get to that in just a second, that there can be quite a risk of hailstorms here in South Central Texas during La Nina years. Of course, that doesn't mean every year is going to turn out to have an increased instance of hail, but it certainly can, and it's worth being aware of. So our local research sort of supports this, especially with respect to hail. And here's our anecdotal evidence of all 7 different instances of 2-inch or greater hail that occurred across our forecast area last year. And that, of course, includes the now state record Hondo hailstone, which was over 6 inches in diameter. that was one of 2 separate instances of 5-inch or greater hail in our area just in a 5-day span. So we're certainly crossing our fingers we don't see anything like that again this year, but it's something worth being aware of as we head into our severe weather season. Now switching gears, looking at precipitation info. Historically, over the last 15 springs with La Nina conditions going back to 1950, just like with temperatures, there's a pretty decent signal for drier than normal conditions continuing through the spring. And that's seen at all 3 of our long-term climate locations. 2/3 to as many as all at Del Rio of their springs have been below normal in the historical record. And so there is also an increased risk, maybe not as much as with temperature, but an increased risk of dry extremes, especially over our western areas. And we're certainly seeing that now, and it's expected to continue. And so here's the climate forecast system model output. This is masked by skill, so all the gray areas are where the model isn't exactly super strong in its certainty of the outlook forecast, but a very strong signal for drier than normal conditions over South Texas for April, May, and June. Again, a stronger signal than was shown in this same model at this time last year. And again, the same goes for the multi-model ensemble, again suggesting below normal rainfall. The probabilities are not as high as with temperature, on the order of 50 to 70% chances of below normal precipitation for South Central Texas, but still a strong enough signal that we have relatively high confidence that drier than normal conditions will continue on average through the spring. Of course, the nature of convective rainfall is difficult to nail down over small spatial and time scales. So some locations likely will see above normal rainfall through the spring, and that can happen even over just 1 or 2 heavy rainfall events. So as we head into that season, still worth being wary of heavy rainfall events being possible, especially over eastern portions of our area where they're climatologically favored due to the proximity to the Gulf. And just one last time showing another way of looking at the wet and dry extremes during La Nina years. There is some relatively low signal, but near to slightly below normal risk of extreme rainfall events during La Nina springs. But an above normal risk of extreme dryness over much of the area and with a stronger signal along the Rio Grande, similar to the current conditions we've been experiencing thus far. So of course, all of our recent dryness and combined with the extreme warmth in December and a lack of both short and long-term rainfall have led to drought continuing to expand and worsen across South Central Texas. So as of yesterday's drought monitor, we now have essentially the entirety of South Central Texas, except for the area along and just east of the Austin metro, where they were able to pick up a little bit of rainfall in the fall and the winter. But the whole rest of the area is under drought, and in fact, exceptional drought was introduced for the first time since fall of 2020 over parts of Dimmitt and Maverick counties this week for the first time. If we're unable to see some rain in some of these areas, which it looks like these will be the least favored areas for Monday's event, unfortunately, this is likely to continue to expand and worsen. And the Climate Prediction Center drought outlook does anticipate filling in the remainder of our non-drought area over the course of the next few months. Of course, there will be times where we get some decent rain and there will be improvements in some areas, but on the whole, expecting at least over the next month or two to see some worsening before we get into some of our rainier months. Hopefully late April into May will bring us some more beneficial rainfall. Unfortunately though, given the preponderance of evidence, the expectation is for a high likelihood of above normal temperatures. And the Climate Prediction Center has that basically on the order of 70 to 80% across our western areas. Not quite as strong a signal for dryness, but still certainly there, leaning below at 40 to 50% chance of below normal rainfall for the April through June period. What does this mean for us? Well, we've already had pretty active fire weather over the last week, and unfortunately, we expect these instances to continue, particularly like we're experiencing today behind cold fronts where we have strong, dry northwest flow. Our soil moistures are very low, as we can see. In fact, over northern portions of El Verde County, their soil moistures are less than the first percentile, which is really incredibly dry. Where there's been a little bit more rain over our eastern counties, not quite as dry, maybe near normal soil moisture still for this time of year, but that may continue to deteriorate if they're unable to pick up significant rainfall over the course of the next few weeks. So our energy release components, which are sort of a measure of the fire potential, are in some of our areas across our west especially near their record highs for this time of year, well above normal and well above where they were at this time last year. The exception is over central Texas, over our eastern areas, still above normal, but not quite as dire a picture, thankfully due to some of the recent rain that's been seen over that area. Just to give you a quick look at what those areas are over our region. They don't match up with our county warning area exactly, but they do give a general sense of the dryness that especially our western locations have been experiencing through the last couple of seasons here. So to wrap up, a look at our risk. Given the antecedent dryness, our risk is likely a little bit below normal, especially in the short term for river flooding. Flash flooding and heavy rain, given the expectation for drier than normal conditions, the risk is slightly below normal, but it's springtime in south central Texas. We are likely to still see some heavy rainfall events, and those could lead to flooding. We saw it last year, and we see it a lot of years here. So it only takes one event. It's worth keeping an eye on our forecast in the short term when the expectation for those events may arrive. In terms of severe weather, slightly above normal impacts, especially over northern portions of our area, and with respect to hail, that's certainly the strongest signal. And then fire weather above to well above normal impacts from wildland fires. We've already had several thousand-acre fires in our area just over the last week and a half. And we do expect, without any significant rainfall, that risk will continue through much of the spring. So with that, I will leave up my contact information. I can be reached by email. You can see our products on our website listed here. And I will take a look here and see if anybody has any questions for me. Thank you so much for your time today, folks. Let's see here. Will the slides be made available? Yes, I will be emailing these slides out to the group. And also any info regarding hurricane potential. Well, our hurricane season isn't until later in the summer and into the fall. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that on my next Outlook presentation. But as of right now, one of the things we can say is that people look to sort of cross their fingers for an El Nino to sort of limit the risk of our hurricane season. Typically, El Nino years increase vertical wind shear over the Atlantic Basin and thus decrease the risk of hurricanes. Unfortunately, like I showed earlier, right now it looks very unlikely that we would be moving towards an El Nino for later this year. So that would mean neutral or potentially even a third year of La Nina cannot be ruled out, which would mean a near or maybe even above normal hurricane season could be possible again. But again, I'll be talking more about that in about 3 months on my next Outlook. Let's see here. When do you expect to slide into neutrality? It looks like there's a pretty good chance that we get out of that La Nina and into a more neutral state in the Pacific, likely in the early summer months is the latest outlook. Thanks for that question, Bill. Last slide says 2021. My apologies. Yes, this is a 2022 outlook. Sorry about that. I missed that right there. Do you monitor dust storms or something to that effect? We do when they're ongoing. We'll sometimes post on social media some neat satellite images when they occur. Dust storms aren't necessarily something that's predictable, ahead of time more than a couple of days. But given the dryness in West Texas, this could, potentially be one of those years where there are somewhat more frequent dust storms over, especially western portions of the state. June 1st through November. Just curious if you had any insights. So we don't really have super strong climate drivers in our summer months. Typically, the El Nino cycle is a winter and spring thing, and then it usually returns to a neutral state during the summer. There are other drivers of our climate system that work on various timescales that can have some impact. And one thing that can be said is that given that our normals that we compare things to are built over a 30-year time frame, with our variability basically superimposed on the long-term warming trend, more often than not we do see warmer than normal temperatures. Last year was certainly one exception. We did have a relatively cool summer here in 2020. So for those that love the anecdotal evidence, perhaps we could see something similar this upcoming summer, but not a whole lot can be said other than we transition into dry and hot. It's Texas, so we'll have lots of days in the 90s, some days in the hundreds. Hopefully not as many as in 2020. 2020 was a very hot summer here, which for me as a northerner wasn't exactly my favorite thing, but we lived through it. Let's see here. Thank you all so much for all these questions. When was the last time we had exceptional drought? Sure, so that was, I just looked this up yesterday, the November 24th, 2020 issuance of the drought monitor did have some small area of D4 drought. It was then eliminated and reduced the following week with the drought monitor issued right at the beginning of December of 2020. So just under a year and a half is the last time that we had exceptional drought in South Central Texas. And then last question I have at the moment, can you give an update on what you are expecting from Monday and Monday night? Well, there's still some details to iron out with that system, but there has been at least some slight shift in the forcing to the east and to the northeast. So the area that SPC has drawn for our now day 4 outlook has shifted just a little bit. They think the best chances for severe weather will likely be just to the northeast of our area, just northeast of Williamson County. But we do still have the 15% contour over most of our I-35 corridor and points eastward. All hazards are possible at this time, including some locally heavy rainfall, damaging winds and potentially large hail. But we'll continue to refine the details over the next few days. It looks like it'll be coming in 2 rounds. There'll be 1 round of showers and storms during the day, particularly over the northern half of our area, and then another round overnight as the frontal boundary comes through. And that one may be the better chance for the strong to severe storms. But like I said, we'll be refining the details and sending out an initial situation report likely this afternoon and updating it daily through the weekend. All right, so let's see here. Next question. Is there any correlation of strong winds with the summary impacts, i.e. will wind speeds be higher given the impacts outlook summary? I'm not sure if you're talking about winds in association with thunderstorms or just general larger scale winds, Robert, but I'll sort of address both. Our risk for general winds. Okay, thank you, Robert. So there's not necessarily any climatological drivers for that, but one thing that's interesting to note is, especially for our east, some of the trees have been slower to green up this year, and so there's been less friction at ground level. That can contribute a little bit maybe to some stronger winds. We have had pretty frequent cold frontal passages, bringing moderate to strong northwesterlies, and then even this time of year in some of our southerly wind regimes, strong pressure gradients have been bringing us, even strong southerlies. I can't necessarily say whether it's more or less than in a normal year, but for this time of year, it's something we certainly see in this part of the country. We may see another day or two through the spring with wind advisories necessary, but can't say that there's anything out of the ordinary expected for our area. All right, I think that covers all of the questions I had. Thank you all for your kind words in the comments. I appreciate that. Of course, I can be reached via email, and I will be sending out a recording of this presentation and the slides sometime later this afternoon. So with that, thank you all for joining me this morning, and I'll see you all again in 3 months.